The Human Cycle by Sri Aurobindo. Chapter 18. The Infrarational Age of the Cycle. In spirituality, then, would lie our ultimate, our only hope for the perfection, whether of the individual or of the communal man. Not the spirit for which its separate satisfaction turns away from the earth and her works, but that greater spirit which surpasses and yet accepts and fulfills them. A spirituality that would take up into itself man's rationalism, aestheticism, ethicism, vitalism, corporeality, his aspiration towards knowledge, his attraction towards beauty, his need of love, his urge towards perfection, his demand for power and fullness of life and being. A spirituality that would reveal to these ill-accorded forces their divine sense and the conditions of their Godhead, reconcile them all to each other, illumine to the vision of each the way which they now tread in half-lights and shadows, in blindness or with a deflected sight, is a power which even man's too self-sufficient reason can accept, or may at least be brought one day to accept as sovereign, and to see in it its own supreme light, its own infinite source. For that reveals itself surely, in the end, as the logical ultimate process, the inevitable development and consummation of all for which man is individually and socially striving. A satisfying evolution of the nascent spirituality, still raw and inchoate in the race, is the possibility to which an age of subjectivism is a first glimmer of awakening, or towards which it shows a first profound potentiality of return, a deeper, wider, greater, more spiritualized, subjective understanding of the individual and communal self and its life, and a growing reliance on the spiritual light and the spiritual means for the final solution of its problems, are the only way to a true social perfection. The free rule, that is to say, the predominant lead, control, and influence of the developed spiritual man, not the half-spiritualized priest, saint, or prophet, or the raw religionist, is our hope for a divine guidance of the race. A spiritualized society can alone bring about a reign of individual harmony and communal happiness, or, in words which, though liable to abuse by the reason and the passions, are still the most expressive we can find, a new kind of theocracy, the kingdom of God upon earth, a theocracy which shall be the government of mankind by the divine in the hearts and minds of men. Certainly, this will not come about easily, or, As men have always vainly hoped from each great new turn and revolution of politics and society, by a sudden and at once entirely satisfying change and magical transformation. The advance, however it comes about, will be indeed of the nature of a miracle, as are all such profound changes and immense developments, for they have the appearance of a kind of realized impossibility. But God works all his miracles by an evolution of secret possibilities, which have been long prepared, at least in their elements, and in the end, by a rapid bringing of all to a head, a throwing together of the elements so that in their fusion they produce a new form and name of things, and reveal a new spirit. Often, the decisive turn is preceded by an apparent emphasizing and raising to their extreme of things which seem the very denial, the most uncompromising opposite of the new principle and the new creation. Such an evolution of the elements of a spiritualized society is that which a subjective age makes at least possible, and if at the same time it raises to the last height of active power things which seem the very denial of such a potentiality, that need be no index of a practical impossibility of the new birth, but on the contrary, may be the sign of its approach, or at the lowest, a strong attempt at achievement. Certainly the whole effort of a subjective age may go wrong. But this happens oftenest when by the insufficiency of its materials, a great crudeness of its starting point, and a hasty shallowness or narrow intensity of its inlook into itself and things, it is foredoomed to a fundamental error of self-knowledge. It becomes less likely when the spirit of the age is full of freedom, variety, and a many-sided seeking, a persistent effort after knowledge and perfection in all the domains of human activity. That can well convert itself into an intense and yet flexible straining after the infinite and the divine on many sides and in many aspects. In such circumstances, though a full advance may possibly not be made, a great step forward can be predicted. We have seen that there are necessarily 3 stages of the social evolution, or generally of the human evolution, in both individual and society. Our evolution starts with an infrarational stage, in which men have not yet learned to refer their life and action, in its principles and its forms, to the judgment of the clarified intelligence. For they still act principally out of their instincts, impulses, spontaneous ideas, vital intuitions, or obey a customary response to desire, need, and circumstance. It is these things that are canalized or crystallized in their social institutions. Man proceeds by various stages out of these beginnings towards a rational age, in which his intelligent will, more or less developed, becomes the judge, arbiter, and presiding motive of his thought, feeling, and action, the molder, destroyer, and recreator of his leading ideas, aims, and intuitions. Finally, if our analysis and forecast are correct, the human evolution must move through a subjective towards a supra-rational or spiritual age, in which he will develop progressively a greater spiritual, supra-intellectual, and intuitive, perhaps in the end a more than intuitive, a Gnostic consciousness. He will be able to perceive a higher divine end, a divine sanction, a divine light of guidance for all he seeks to be, think, feel, and do, and able, too, more and more to obey and live in this larger light and power. That will not be done by any rule of infra-rational religious impulse and ecstasy, such as characterized, or rather darkly illumined, the obscure confusion and brute violence of the Middle Ages, but by a higher spiritual living, for which the clarities of the reason are a necessary preparation, and into which they too will be taken up, transformed, brought to their invisible source. These stages or periods are much more inevitable in the psychological evolution of mankind than the stone and other ages, marked out by science in his instrumental culture, for they depend not on outward means or accidents, but on the very nature of his being. But we must not suppose that they are naturally exclusive and absolute in their nature, or complete in their tendency or fulfillment when they come, or rigidly marked off from each other in their action or their time. For they not only arise out of each other, but may be partially developed in each other, and they may come to coexist in different parts of the earth at the same time. But especially, since man as a whole is always a complex being, even man, savage or degenerate, he cannot be any of these things exclusively or absolutely, so long as he has not exceeded himself, has not developed into the Superman, has not, that is to say, spiritualized and divinized his whole being. At his animal worst, he is still some kind of thinking or reflecting animal. Even the infra-rational man cannot be utterly infra-rational, but must have, or tend to have, some kind of play more or less evolved or involved of the reason, and a more or less crude supra-rational element, a more or less disguised working of the spirit. At his lucid mental best, he is still not a pure mental being, a pure intelligence. Even the most perfect intellectual is not, and cannot be, wholly or merely rational. There are vital urgings that he cannot exclude, visits or touches of a light from above that are not less super-rational because he does not recognize their source. No God, but at his highest, a human being touched with a ray of the divine influence. Man's very spirituality, however dominant, must have, while he is still this imperfectly evolved human, its rational and infrarational tendencies and elements. And as with the psychological life of individuals, so must it be with the ages of his communal existence. These may be marked off from each other by the predominant play of one element. Its force may overpower the others, or take them into itself, or make some compromise, but an exclusive play seems to be neither intended nor possible. Thus, an infrarational period of human and social development need not be without its elements, its strong elements of reason and of spirituality. Even the savage, whether he be primitive or degenerate man, has some coherent idea of this world and the beyond, a theory of life and a religion. To us, with our more advanced rationality, his theory of life may seem incoherent, because we have lost its point of view and its principle of mental associations. But it is still an act of reason, and within its limits he is capable of a sufficient play of thought, both ideative and practical, as well as a clear ethical idea and motive, some aesthetic notions, and an understood order of society, poor and barbarous to our view, but well enough contrived and put together to serve the simplicity of its objects. Or again, we may not realize the element of reason in a primitive theory of life, or of spirituality in a barbaric religion, because it appears to us to be made up of symbols and forms, to which a superstitious value is attached by these undeveloped minds. But this is because the reason at this stage has an imperfect and limited action, and the element of spirituality is crude or undeveloped, and not yet self-conscious. In order to hold firmly their workings, and make them real and concrete to his mind and spirit, primitive man has to give them shape in symbols and forms to which he clings with a barbaric awe and reverence, because they alone can embody for him his method of self-guidance in life. For the dominant thing in him is his infrarational life of instinct, vital intuition and impulse, mechanical custom and tradition, and it is that to which the rest of him has to give some kind of primary order and first glimmerings of light. The unrefined reason and unenlightened spirit in him cannot work for their own ends. They are bond slaves of his infrarational nature.